Grace and peace. Apostle Cheryl here. So we're going to be talking about this month. I'm really looking forward to this series because for 4 weeks, every week this month, we're going to be talking about domestic violence, though, from the perspective of the survivor. The perspective of the survivor. And we believe that this is important because whether you are the victim yourself or survivor, or you are connected to someone who is, we can be more effective. If it's your own journey, you can navigate it more successfully. If it's someone that you love, that you care about, you can help them navigate it more effectively and more positively and with greater positive results if you have a better understanding of what domestic violence is like for a survivor. And so it's our hope that we can get some survivors on that have reached a place in their journey where they are comfortable with sharing their story to further their own healing and also to help someone else to either embark on their own journey of healing or to continue on their journey of healing. Okay, so it's important that we be able to look at this and understand it and grasp it from the perspective of a survivor. Now, so far we've got a couple who have committed to coming on, but I'm not pushing them. I'm respecting, their boundaries, and they're saying that they want to come on. They may get anxious and feel like they're not able to do it, and that's okay because we're gonna press ahead. And just know that if you are a survivor or if you know someone who is, that reach out to me, inbox me, let me know, and we can share your story. And if you're in a position where you need your identity to be hidden a bit, and we can do that too, okay? But I think it's important, if you are a survivor, that you continue on your journey of healing or embark upon it if you have not already. And it's important that we know too that you just can't do it by yourself. This is not one of those things where you can just say, I don't need anybody and I got this. You can't do this by yourself. You can't get out of it by yourself. Okay? You can't survive in it by yourself. You need support. You need prayer. You need understanding. You need encouragement when things start looking a little wacky. All right, but we're getting started a little bit earlier today because we want you all to be able to tailgate and scream and yell at your TV and wear your jerseys and all that good stuff. But we weren't feeling led to not do it because, as we stated previously, domestic violence does not take a day off. And as a matter of fact, because today will likely involve the consumption of substances, lots of excitement, maybe spending time with family, those who are in a domestic violence situation may be under increased pressure today, and they may be at a little bit higher risk today because of the things that I just mentioned. So we couldn't not do it. We have to do it. I'm going to encourage you to do a watch party later on today or tomorrow or whenever. And please tag your friends and share. And you know what? Tag those people who you think don't even need to hear this, because you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised who was actually caught in the grip of domestic violence and they are not sharing it. And they put on a good face and a good smile, and they are in the belly of hell in reality. All right. And so I'm going to wave to those that I can. But okay, so we're not going to go as long as we normally do, and we won't cover as much ground as we normally do. But we want to get started on this. We're talking about domestic violence from the perspective of a survivor. Okay, so when you're talking about domestic violence, you're talking about a relationship that is toxic, okay? And toxic by definition is acting as or having the effect of a poison. Acting as or having the effect of a poison. Causing unpleasant feelings, being harmful, or being malicious. And so by the time a relationship kind of rolls over into this place where there's domestic violence occurring, it has already become toxic, okay? It has already become toxic. Now, what is another word for toxic? Deadly, harmful, lethal, virulent, noxious, poison, venomous. So you're talking about a relationship that has become deadly, harmful, lethal, virulent, noxious, poisonous, or venomous. All right? The complete opposite of a relationship that has become toxic is one that is harmless, it is healthy, it is helpful, it is kind, and it is wholesome. Okay? So I've just given you what it is, and I've given you what a toxic relationship is not. Okay, so if the relationship that you're in, or the one that you've just escaped, or the one that you wish to God you could get out of, is not healthy, it's not wholesome. You don't feel good about yourself. You don't feel hopeful. You're not forward thinking in terms of your future and your life goals and your purpose and your destiny. There's something wrong with the situation that you have gotten yourself into. Hey, Pastor Shonda. And so we're talking about abuse from the perspective of the survivor. We're going to go pretty fast today, but we got all month to cover this, okay? And if you or someone that you know has a history of domestic violence and they feel comfortable sharing, if they need to do it with their screen black, we can do that. If we need to change their name, we can do that. If they want to adopt a fake accent, we can roll with that too, okay? What's important is that they be able to share, because sharing it is an important part of healing, as long as you're not only rehearsing the pain. Many groups out here, everybody gets together and it's like a competition. Who went through the worst hell? Whose abuser was worse? How many bones did I get broken? How many times did my eyes get black? And there's a time for that, I guess, in the very, very beginning. But if you really are serious about healing, you've got to move past rehearsing the hurt. You've got to move past rehearsing the hurt and move into a place where when you're talking about this, you are coming up out of it, and that it is coming up out of you, that the pain is coming up out of you, that your spirit is beginning to heal, that mentally and emotionally you can begin to embrace healing, that you don't need to revisit the pain in order to feel something, okay? You understand what I'm saying? And so this is why in our closed group, our private group on Facebook, Dominion Over Domestic Violence, it is, hey Kate, it's a private group. We scrutinize who comes in. We keep it small on purpose. This is our mandate from the Lord, because it is not, that's not our mantle. That's not our, we are not called to help you to stay stuck. We are not called to get a bunch of broken people together so everybody can talk about how much more broken they are than the other one. Okay, so we're about growth. We're not for everybody. We are about growth and coming up out of it. We are about empowering the victim and empowering those around them so that they can be a genuine, authentic support and a help to them. Okay? Now, we're not down on what anybody else is doing, but we're just telling you what we're not doing and what our purpose is. Okay? This is what we're talking about. Hey, Kevin. So here's the thing. A toxic relationship is one that is acting or is having an effect like a poison, right? It's causing unpleasant feelings. It's harmful. It's malicious, okay? And when you talk about malicious, you're talking about intent now. We're not talking about somebody had a bad day at work and they came home with an attitude. We're talking about malicious. I am targeting you. My goal is to damage you. My goal is to control you. And that is the whole purpose that you are in my life. You are my supply so that I can be in control of something, okay? I need to be in control of something, and I choose you. Okay, that's what domestic violence is about. It has nothing at all to do with love. There's no love. There's no love. There's no love in that. There's no love in that, okay? Now, so we're talking about from the standpoint of a survivor. It's important to know that not all toxic relationships are caused by two unhealthy people. All you need is one. All you need is one unhealthy person, and you need for the other person who may start off healthy to start overriding their gut instinct, right? Override that and stay. Make excuses and stay. Rationalize and stay. Misappropriate scripture, okay? And stay. Okay, that's a good one. We'll take a scripture and we'll twist that thing up so bad, okay? And it don't even mean when we get through with it what God intended, okay? And it keeps people in harm's way, so we need to be mindful of that. Now, so, from the perspective of a survivor, there are things that we need to understand. Domestic violence in all of its forms is an ongoing traumatic experience. So, it's not a discrete thing. It's not a one-time thing and nothing else ever happened, okay? That's not what we're talking about. So it's traumatic. It's incredibly traumatic. And so when you're dealing with a survivor, no matter how long it's been since they've experienced it, there is some residual impact. Hey, Queen Victoria, there is some residual impact from the abuse that they have experienced. I don't care if it was years ago. I don't care if it was 20, 30 years ago. There's a residual effect. And what a survivor can learn to do is to manage that and to be able to recognize how that experience has affected him or her in their relationships with others, in their ability to trust, for example. If you know that you tend to not trust, and if you know that you tend to be a little suspicious, okay, because of what you've experienced in the past, then you want to take that into consideration when you are dealing with and interacting with other people, but you don't want to completely override and negate whatever your gut is telling you. Now, one day I'm going to do a whole live about how the way God has built our bodies, that there are literally sensors in our gut. We call it a gut feeling, and that's exactly what it is. There are sensors in our abdomen, in our stomach, in our gut that will alert us when something's not quite right. I'm not making that up. Isn't that something? So we can't override these things. You don't override the knot in your stomach. Don't override that nagging, this looks okay on the outside, but something is off, okay? Something is off. Listen, when I was 19, right, if something was off, I wanted to know what was off. I wanted to understand why it was off. I wanted to understand if I could help it not be off. Fast forward to today. If my gut, if the Spirit of God, if something tells me that something is wrong, I don't need to know what it is. Okay? I don't need to know what it is. I don't need to know what it is. Okay? I'm not 19 and I don't need to know. I don't have to experience the craziness to acknowledge that something's not right here. Okay? And so this, and I'm just sharing that because it's something that I can't tell you how many close calls. I can't tell you how many close calls. I just can't tell. My friends laugh at me because it's like, nope. Nope. That's not God, okay? That's not God. You get so you can tell. You get so, if you don't override it, right? If you respect it and you don't override it, and if you don't accept what the abuser has told you about how you can't trust your own judgment, blah, 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 then you'll be okay, all right? So when you're dealing with a survivor, you want to understand their perspective. They've been dealing with trauma, and it's not a discrete incident of trauma. It's several incidents. They may be closely stacked together. They may be spaced out over time, okay? The one thing that we recognize as domestic violence typically, okay, is actual physical violence. But what we're not understanding is that the emotional violence and the psychological violence that takes place on an ongoing basis. So even if a victim's not being hit every single day, okay, even if they're not getting their head shoved through the drywall every day, they're not getting their orbital socket broken every day, they're probably getting cussed out every day. They're probably getting called names every day. They may be experiencing financial abuse every day, and all of this is ongoing trauma. So you need to understand that a victim of domestic violence has experienced more than the incident that they're talking to you about, that there's a whole hierarchy of abuse that has been ongoing in that relationship. Oftentimes, even before the victim themselves recognizes that they're being mistreated. And many times, victims will deal with this for years. Ashley, I miss you. They'll deal with it for years and they don't even recognize that they're being abused. They have no idea that they're being mistreated. They don't know. They don't know, and because of isolation, no one else knows what they're experiencing truly, okay? So, the hallmark of a toxic relationship, when we just talked about what toxic is, right? Malicious, noxious, harmful, poisonous, venomous. The hallmark of a toxic relationship or domestic violence riddled relationship is that it is overwhelming mentally, it's overwhelming physically, it's overwhelming psychologically, and it's even overwhelming most times financially. Many times victims find themselves in a position where financially they can't just leave. They can't just leave because over time the abuser has gained control of the finances, okay? One primary challenge for victims is finding the wherewithal, first of all, to arrive to the conclusion that they are, in fact, being mistreated. That's the first thing. That's the first thing. People don't know why they don't leave. Oftentimes, they don't understand that they're being mistreated. So, in order for them to accept that they're being mistreated, they have to accept that they accepted this person into their life, brought this person into their life, exposed this person to everything that matters to them, their family, children if they already have children, their close friends, their secrets. And they have to acknowledge that that was a horrible decision. That's not easy. And the more you've invested, the more difficult it is to accept that you would jeopardize everything that matters to you, and this person is a monster, whether they be a man or a woman. Okay? So the first hard thing for a survivor to do is to accept within himself or herself that they are in fact being mistreated, and that they have been complicit insofar as they chose this person or they allowed this person to choose them and they stayed chosen. They didn't exit early on. Okay? So that's the first hard step. That's the first hard thing. Elkie! Hey, buddy. So that's the first hard thing, to recognize that you're in that situation at all. And then at that point, it's easy to kind of fall into self-degradation and abusing yourself in terms of what you're saying to yourself about yourself because of the situation that you're in. And then in comes the shame, and in comes the embarrassment, and then in comes the isolation, because most times you're not trying to tell nobody not only that this person is a monster, that their head spins around and they spit out green stuff, but that you picked them, or that they picked you, or that you thought they were amazing. Hey, V, and you told everybody how amazing they were, and now it's a living nightmare. It's nightmare. It's nightmare on your street. It's horrible. It's hard, and it's so horrible you won't tell anybody. Okay? So the first thing is acknowledging that this is where you are, that this is where my life is, and I don't know how I got here, but this is where I am. Okay? And then the second thing is arriving at a decision to exit, which may take a very long time for all of the reasons that we've already mentioned, okay? But then the other thing is formulating an actual plan. So, okay, so I accept that I was duped. I accept that I have overlooked some things. I accept that when I look back, there were some clear signals, and I made excuses for them. I found a scripture to make it okay. I only talked to people who supported me being in this relationship or whatever. So I pretty much kind of boxed myself into a corner here. All right. And now I understand that I'm being mistreated. Whatever responsibility I share and how I got here, I accept that. Okay. And now I need to get out of here. I need to exit this. This is not my life. This is not what God intended for me to experience. All right. This is at cross purposes with my God ordained purpose. This is threatening my destiny. All right. And so those are all the things that a survivor has to deal with. And then they have to deal with the psychological trauma. So the psychological trauma, while you're trapped and you're not sure how you're getting out, and the threats are escalating, and now you know what they're capable of. Okay. You know what they're capable of because if they haven't told you directly, they've demonstrated it or hinted at it, giving you kind of veiled threats, right? So you know what they're capable of. You know what they say they're going to do if you don't do X, Y, and Z, all right? And so then comes the intense fear and this feeling of helplessness because, again, there's isolation. You feel like a loss of control and threats of being destroyed, annihilated, expunged, whatever they've told you that they're going to do to you. You've now come to understand that they probably will do that. Okay? Then comes the concern of, well, who's going to believe me if I tell them about this person? Because they're so outgoing and they're so charismatic and they're bright and they're funny. They're the life of the party. They give you the shirt off their back. It is not unusual to hear these things about abusers because that's the face that they wear in public. And they are invested and committed to keeping that mask in place, okay? They are committed to that. Now, all you need is a well-meaning, uneducated ministry leader, therapist, some other flying monkey to step into your life and give you a scripture or an anecdote or a cliche, which end result is that you get to stay in this craziness and don't do nothing about it, okay? And oftentimes that's the case. It's one of the things that motivates us is that we get really, honestly, can I just be honest with you? I get so angry when I hear, and even when I think back to some of the horrible advice that I was given. I'm telling you, horrible. Now, I'm not going to name no names, and I forgive them, but that was some stupid advice. And it's a wonder I'm alive, okay? Just a wonder I'm alive. And as a matter of fact, I'm alive because at some point I decided I wasn't listening to them. That's what happened, okay? Now, it's important to understand that the determination of trauma is not made based on generally accepted overarching criteria, right? We can define what trauma is, but it looks different in every survivor. And so every survivor is not going to respond the same to trauma. And it's important to know the things that may strike me as traumatic may not bother you at all, and vice versa, okay? Things that have traumatized you may not bother me at all, because we're all individuals. We all have different capacities. We all have different varying degrees of resilience, okay? We have different life experiences. Our perceptions are different. Our circumstances are not exactly the same. But so we can talk about what trauma is generally, but it's important to understand that you don't want to minimize the effect of trauma on a victim because what they're describing to you doesn't seem like such a big deal. Like, what? They did what? So they said they cussed you out because you burnt the eggs and you traumatized by that? It just depends. It depends on, it's just like any other wound. It depends on how broken, how wounded, how vulnerable you were in the first place. That's what determines if an all-out attack, if another injury, that determines how well you manage that second injury. What condition were you in the first place? Hey, Joseph. Woman of God, Karen, hey. So how damaged were you in the first place? That will determine how well you can navigate additional trauma, okay? And you don't have any control over that. You're however damaged and wounded you are, that's how damaged and wounded you are. And if you experience another wound or another trauma, it's going to have an effect on you. And it may have a more dominant effect on you than it would have on someone who's not experienced what you have experienced previously in your life, okay? So no two survivors are going to respond in the exact same way to trauma. No two survivors are going to describe for you their trauma in the exact same way, okay? For some, it wasn't until a weapon was introduced and put to their head that they begin to experience trauma. For others, it was the first time they got cursed out because they'd never been addressed that way. You understand what I'm saying? Why am I emphasizing this? Because it's important that we not make our own life experience the standard by which we measure another person's trauma. Again, something that may not bother me at all may be incredibly traumatic for you. And something that is incredibly traumatic for you might not faze me at all, okay? May not faze me at all. Doesn't mean it's not traumatic for you. So if someone comes to you and says, this is what happened, and this is the effect it's having on me, don't minimize their trauma, their experience, based on what you've experienced, okay? So oftentimes victims are kind of, even when people attempt to help, they end up trying to tell them how to feel. They end up trying to tell them, hey, Pastor Michael, they try to tell the victim how they, oh, you shouldn't feel bad about that. That's not, no, don't do that. You do better not to say anything. We've got to get out of this mindset where we want everything in a neat little package with a bow popped on top so that we feel better, okay? If a person tells you they're traumatized, they're traumatized. If they tell you this experience, this relationship is having a negative effect on them, it's having a negative effect on them. It doesn't have to meet my criteria for a horrible relationship in order for it to be a horrible relationship for them. You understand what I'm saying? Okay. So no two survivors will respond in the same way. And traumatic reactions are not indicators of mental or emotional weakness. Now, I need to say this again. Having a response to trauma Having a response to trauma does not make you mentally ill. Now, I'm a career mental health professional, so I can say that. I assure you, the fact that you are having certain responses, and I want to talk about those briefly, does not make you mentally ill. Does not mean you need to be in a psychiatric hospital, okay? Does not mean that you need to be under a psychiatrist's care. It means that you've experienced trauma and you need to be able to process that effectively, and you need to be able to understand it. And so oftentimes the criteria for various mental illnesses, whether it be anxiety or depression, right, or even psychosis, many of these illnesses have as symptoms, they share symptoms with a traumatic response. Doesn't mean you're mentally ill. So the fact that you can't sleep does not make you mentally ill. The fact that you have an exaggerated startle reflex, you can't, you startle easily, does not make you mentally ill, does not mean you need medication, does not mean you need to be under psychiatrist's care. It means that something has traumatized you and that needs to be processed. So maybe therapy will be good for you so that you can identify what it is, but it does not make you mentally ill. Okay? Now, when you go to see a mental health professional, oftentimes if they're going to be paid by your insurance company, they've got to put some kind of label on you. I'm just gonna tell the truth. And many of you on here are therapists. We've worked together, so you know what I'm saying. You have to put it in a category so that the insurance company will pay for it. Okay? What I'm saying to you is, because you have these responses to trauma does not make you mentally ill. That's what I'm saying. Okay. Now, is that the case sometimes? Certainly. But it's not a foregone conclusion that you are mentally ill because you have a response to trauma that you've experienced in your life, okay? Now, so if we're going to be effective in advocating for survivors, being supportive of them in genuine ways, then our approach needs to be trauma-informed, okay? What do I mean by that? Trauma-informed means that you learn, understand what trauma is, okay? I started this off by defining what it is. But discussing what trauma is, learning what it is, learning how it affects people, and how it affects their response to day-to-day life. Because oftentimes what happens is a survivor's response is misunderstood. And so then the response and the feedback that they get from society, that they get from their family, that they get from their best friend or whoever is off because they've misinterpreted the response or the lack of response, right? From a survivor. All right. What's an example? I used to be the director of a homeless shelter. I did that for 4 years, right? In St. Louis. And we were an incredibly busy shelter. But we had rules because shelters have rules, right? You have to have rules. You can't just have no rules. You've got all these people thrown in together. They don't know each other. They come from different walks of life, different life experiences, different abilities, different level of commitment to their daily living skills, bathing, just basic things like that. So you have to have rules. But one of the things that I noticed with my staff is that they had become so rigid with their rules that they weren't considering that, okay, the rule says that you get up at 8 o'clock, and the rule says that you make your bed, for example, and the rule says that you feed your children and then you clean up the kitchen after that. So you can get a demerit if you don't get up and do everything that I just described. But there's no consideration that 2 days ago, this woman had a gun put to her head. The trigger was pulled. The gun didn't go off, thank God, okay? She is completely depleted emotionally. She's been getting beaten and disrespected on a regular basis, right? She's got these children she's got to take care of. She's exhausted. This is the first time in shelter that she's been able to even sleep. And you want to give her demerit because she didn't make her bed. Okay? So that's an excellent example of support services being extended that are not trauma-informed. So you've got to be able to make adjustments in your expectations. Our expectations must be reasonable, okay? It is absurd to expect a survivor to be able to jump up, get dressed, go to work, feed the kids, drive, and be happy and peppy, and they just went through whatever they just went through. Their whole entire life has been flipped inside out, okay? a person that they trusted and loved and exposed their whole life to has betrayed them in the most egregious way, right? And we want to get upset because they didn't make the bed before they left the shelter to catch the bus to ride all the way across town in hopes that they would get a job. It's unreasonable. Unreasonable. So when we are trying to lend support, you want it to be trauma informed, okay? And so part of our motivation for doing this series, the Lord was dealing with us about it, is that we need to understand where we're coming from. And we need to understand, hey, Vic, what it is. Hey, Johnny, we need to understand what it is that we don't know, right? So that we can actually help and not further traumatize a trauma victim, all right? Now, so when you're talking about trauma-informed care or trauma-informed support, you're talking about being intentional, setting in your mind, setting in your heart that I'm not going to re-traumatize this person. I'm not going to batter them verbally. I'm not going to batter them emotionally. I'm not going to try to make them do what I want them to do, okay? That this thing has to move at their own pace, all right? So intentionality is employed in terms of avoiding re-traumatizing them. You set out with that being the first line. I'm not re-traumatizing this person. No matter what we have to do here, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to shove their head in the meat grinder because they still love the abuser. I'm not going to make them feel bad because they are waffling back and forth. I'm going to educate myself about what trauma does to the brain of a survivor. I'm going to educate myself about what's helpful and what's hurtful in terms of lending support to them. So if we're going to help someone because we really want to help someone, then it's not about making us feel good, right? Okay, I thought that they should leave and they left. Yay. That makes me an amazing advocate. If he wasn't really ready to do that, they're going back and they might get killed this time. You understand what I'm saying? And so it's important that we respect the process, no matter how we might feel about it permanently. So basic understanding of trauma and how survivors are affected is critical. It's critical. Understanding of how the victim may behave, how they may respond, or how they may even resist your help is important, okay? Knowing that you may get some resistance, and that's all part of it. It's not personal. They're not stupid. This is all part of the process, okay? It's all part of the process. So you want to refrain from operating in the mindset of, well, what's wrong with you? Don't ask us about, well, what's wrong with you? Ask them, what happened to you? What happened to you? What happened, okay? Why is that important? Because you're not questioning if something happened. You're not questioning if something happened. And you're not questioning if it was really traumatizing, okay? Because as we've talked about previously, we don't get to decide. What may traumatize you may not bother me at all. May not bother me at all. And honestly, because of my history of abuse and what I've experienced over the course of my life, I've noticed, and people who know me have noticed, that the things that bother them and like throw them off don't bother me at all. Don't bother me at all. I've been through so much worse that it doesn't bother me. And so it doesn't mean that it shouldn't bother you. It doesn't even mean that it shouldn't bother me, okay? It just means that it doesn't. That the effect what trauma has done to me is it has numbed me out in certain areas, and certain things just aren't a problem for me. And what I've noticed about myself is this: I can go through whatever crisis. I can go through, if your hair was on fire, I could calmly get your hair out. I could put the fire out and be completely calm. If I'm going to feel something, I'll feel it later. I'll feel it later. And I may really feel it, right? But in that moment, I'm good. In that moment, I can function, okay? And so we all respond differently, and you want to make sure that you're not minimizing another person's response or deciding that they're not really traumatized because they're not responding in the way that you think that they should, or because you think that the incident that they described to you is not a big deal, all right? Now, so you want to facilitate growth, right, and healing. And there's a point at which, and I've said this before, they're simply rehearsing about how horrible it was and all the gory details about what was done to you and how it was done and where it was done and what music was playing in the background when it was done and what was cooking on the stove when it was done and how many times it was done and what they said when they was doing it. Is not helpful. It's not helpful. And what it does, and this has been scientifically proven, is it keeps you from processing what you actually need to process to get better. It's like you get stuck. You get stuck. You get stuck. And so you want to be mindful of asking a survivor to continually rehearse what they have experienced, okay? Because it really keeps them from moving forward after a while, all right? At first it's okay, but after a while. And then being culturally competent is really, really important. You want to understand the culture that's involved, all right? I lived and worked in Alaska for 2 years, and the Alaskan Native culture is very rich. It's very unique, and it's very, very rich. And they process things a little bit differently, and they perceive things a little bit differently. And every culture has its own nuances, and so you want to be careful that you don't impose your cultural viewpoint upon a survivor who may have a different cultural view. And I'm not just talking about race, because I'm African American, right? Maybe you're African American, but if we come from two different backgrounds, if you grew up in the country, in the woods somewhere, all right, in a rural part of Mississippi, and I grew up in New York City, our experiences, our culture is not the same. We've got the same complexion, but we've got different life experiences. We have different ways of measuring what's positive and what's negative. So you want to be careful that you're not imposing your belief system on another person, okay? And so you want to be culturally sensitive regarding that, all right? But there are two major differences between your typical traumatic experience, like maybe a car accident or train accident or, you know, even being the victim of a violent crime, and domestic violence. The episodes of trauma associated with domestic violence are not discrete, and I mentioned this before. It's not a one-time incident. It's not a car accident that happened one time on an icy road. At least I know I don't have to worry about driving in the summertime, right? Because there's no ice on the road. So the effect of the trauma is different. When you're talking about domestic violence, as I said before, the thing that we all recognize as domestic violence is the physical aggression, the physical abuse. But all of the underpinnings of domestic violence involve violence on some level, whether it's emotional, psychological, whether it's financial abuse, the tongue lashings, the being called out of your name, fist being put through the wall, walking through the house with a weapon. You don't have to say nothing. You walking around with a butcher knife. What am I supposed to deduce from that? Okay, you don't have to tell me you're gonna do nothing to me. You just walking around waving this knife. All right. So these veiled threats, all these kinds of things can happen, and all of that is traumatic and it's ongoing. So even when the victim's not being hit, there's other forms of violence being practiced. Okay. DV is an ongoing experience for everyone that's even in close proximity, because everyone around the victim has to deal with the behaviors of the victim, and they don't even have a full, clear context, an accurate context from which to evaluate how they're experiencing the victim. You know, maybe they're moody, maybe they're tearful, maybe they're anxious, maybe they're withdrawn, and if you don't know why, it doesn't make sense. And if you don't know why, you don't really know how to respond to it. Maybe it'll irritate you because you don't know what they're going through. Maybe you just think they have a nasty attitude. You understand what I'm saying? And so it's important to know that it's the far-reaching effects. All right? So the second thing is that the abuser or the perpetrator is a loved one. This is someone that the victim has chosen at some point. They may have pursued them for weeks. They may have pursued them. I know of cases where they were pursued by the abuser for a year and a half, just nonstop. And finally they decided they'd go for coffee. Finally they decided they'd go for lunch or whatever, all right? And things were great for about 5 minutes. And then that other joker showed up, okay? So knowing that you've been duped, right? that you've been fooled, that you've been tricked. And in some cases, again, tricked again. All right, bamboozled yet again, okay? Someone that you have let into your life, if you already have children, that you have allowed to interact with your children. They've met your family, they've met your best friend, they know all your secrets, and they have betrayed you in the most egregious way. And so that makes domestic violence particularly debilitating. This is not a stranger who did this, all right? David said, it was not my enemy, right? It wasn't my enemy that came from me. I could have handled that. I know that's not my friend. I know that's not someone that loves me, okay? But it was you, someone that I shared my life with, someone that I've shared my secrets with, someone that I have trusted, that I have invested my love and time and attention in, and you've betrayed me, right? So now what do I do? Because I can't trust my own judgment, right? This establishes that I can't trust my own judgment. So now what am I to do? What am I to do? So in isolation, a victim will flounder. A victim will flounder, okay? The violation of trust is huge, and the isolation that normally accompanies that makes it that much worse, okay? Experiencing triggers that revive traumatic responses is another thing that you want to be aware of. That sounds or smells, colors, a significant life event, the anniversary of an event can be a trigger. Objects can be a trigger. Okay, all of these things can take the victim back to a place where it feels like they're reliving that whole experience. Just a smell, the cologne, the music that they listen to. All right, the food that they ate, the meal that you prepared for them. Okay, any of these things can be a trigger. All right, so you may notice increased avoidance and isolation in an attempt to avoid triggers, which means that a survivor will often, they'll kind of reinvent their life, even after they leave a toxic situation, so as not to run into certain people, so as not to see and experience certain things, to avoid places where they spent time with the abuser, in a time when they thought they were happier, in a time when they were openly trusting, all right? Hey, Jason. And so all of these things can be triggers, and it's important to understand that too, all right? And if you or someone that you know is a survivor and they feel like they're in a place in their journey where they want to share their experience to further their own healing and to help and encourage others, tell them inbox me, email me, let me know, okay? If we need to disguise you a little bit, we can do that. We can change your name. We can do whatever we need to do. All right. This is Apostle Cheryl L. Richardson. Feel free to check in with me about joining our private Facebook group. And again, it's not a group where we just collect people and everybody, compares their bruises and compares their wounds and compares how mean was your abuser, my abuser was this mean, because there's nothing healthy about that. That's not healthy. It's not healthy. And we are really interested in helping people to move forward and to grow and to learn, right? And to be strengthened and empowered. Because we are convinced that we all have a purpose. We have a God-given purpose. And it does not involve being mistreated and dogged and ground to powder. That was not God's plan, all right? And so we want to help those who are ready to be helped to correct their trajectory and to gain some strength and to learn who they are and just how amazing they are and what they have to offer. We want you to understand that there's life on the other side of this, but you can't do it by yourself. You need help. You need help. You need help, okay? And there's plenty of help out here. There's plenty of help out here, all right? You have our blog, Judah's Roar, and I'll put these links in as soon as we're done. So we have our blog. We've got the closed Facebook group. You've got Stand Up Survivor. The CEO is Lisa Alexander. Misty Shavers is an advocate. She's on here all the time. Donna Wright, Why Not Domestic Violence and Child Abuse. There are lots and lots and lots. Safe in Harm's Way. So there's help out here. Don't believe that lie that there's no help, that you're isolated, that nobody understands, because we do. We get it. We understand. And there is help out here. All right. This is Apostle Cheryl Richardson. I'll be back on next week, and we love you. All right. God bless.